Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The case I'm about to present has remained largely forgotten in the shadows of Savannah's documented history. What follows is a carefully researched account of events surrounding the Magnolia estate and its mistress in the years following the Civil War, a time when the South was rebuilding and some secrets were buried deeper than others. In the spring of 1875, a woman known to Savannah society as Eliza Blackwood became the subject of whispered conversations throughout the city's elite circles. Her husband, Colonel James Blackwood, a decorated Confederate officer who had managed to retain much of his fortune after the war, had passed away under circumstances that were considered unremarkable at the time. Pneumonia, according to the death certificate signed by Dr. Thomas Merritt, a longtime family physician whose handwriting appeared unusually hurried on the document. What drew attention was not the colonel's death itself, but what followed. Eliza, now the widow of one of Savannah's wealthiest men, withdrew almost completely from society. The Grand Magnolia estate on the outskirts of town, with its sprawling grounds and distinctive white columns, became increasingly isolated. Servants who had worked there for decades quietly sought employment elsewhere. The gates remained closed, the curtains drawn. Local records from the Savannah Municipal Archives indicate that between April and December of 1875, no fewer than 6 individuals who had previous connections to the Blackwood household disappeared from public record. Their names appear in census data prior to this period, but vanish afterward. Margaret Wilson, a head housekeeper; Frederick Jenkins, the estate's groundskeeper; Harriet and Samuel Moore, longtime servants; Dr. Merritt himself, and, curiously, Pastor William Hayes of the First Presbyterian Church, who had been a regular visitor to the estate. A journalist for the Savannah Morning News, Robert Campbell, noted these absences in his personal journal, though no article on the matter ever appeared in print. His journal, discovered in 1963 during the renovation of the newspaper's former offices, contained the following entry, dated October 12, 1875. Third attempt to arrange interview with Mrs. Blackwood denied. Porter says she is indisposed yet again. Strange sounds reported by neighbors. Editor refuses to pursue story. Says Blackwood financial interests too valuable to paper. The estate itself stood on nearly 40 acres of land along the Vernon River, approximately 5 miles southeast of Savannah's historic district. The main house, built in 1842, featured architectural elements typical of Southern plantation homes: imposing white columns, a wide veranda that wrapped around 3 sides of the structure, and large windows designed to capture river breezes. Behind the main house stood a separate kitchen building connected by a covered walkway, and further back, the servants' quarters. Most distinctive, however, was what locals called the Winter Garden, a large greenhouse constructed of iron and glass, built by Colonel Blackwood in 1868 as a gift to his wife. According to records from Harrison Iron Works, the structure cost more than most homes in Savannah at the time. Mrs. Blackwood was known for her unusual botanical interests, cultivating rare specimens acquired from as far away as South America and Asia. The property also contained something that would later become central to this story: a system of cellars unusual for coastal Georgia, where the high water table typically made underground construction difficult. Colonel Blackwood had apparently insisted on their construction, despite the considerable expense and engineering challenges. Tax records from 1845 show a substantial payment to a French engineering firm for drainage innovations and subterranean construction. Neighbors to the estate were few, with the closest being the Turner family to the north, whose property line stood a quarter-mile from the Blackwood home. Martha Turner, whose diary entries from 1875-1876 were preserved by her nephew and later donated to the Savannah Historical Society in 1952, wrote repeatedly of strange occurrences observed from her second-story bedroom window, which had a partial view of the Magnolia estate. April 30th, 1875. Strange lights in the greenhouse again tonight. Movement of lanterns, perhaps, though more steady than a carried flame. Eliza has not been seen in town since James's funeral. I sent a basket with our manservant yesterday, but he was turned away at the gate by a man I do not recognize. And a later entry. June 18th, 1875. The smell has returned. Henry insists it is merely the marsh, but it comes only when the wind blows from the direction of Blackwood Land, and it is not the usual salt and mud of the river. Something sickly sweet beneath it. The roses I planted along our southern fence have wilted, though the gardener can find no disease or pest. Martha Turner's diary contains no entries between September 1875 and January 1876. A curious gap for someone who had otherwise maintained daily records for over 20 years. When the entries resume, they make no reference to the previous silence nor to the Blackwood estate, focusing instead on household matters and social engagements. What few knew about Martha Turner was her own background in botanical science, unusual for a woman of her time. Before marrying Henry Turner, she had assisted her father, a professor of natural sciences at a university in Boston. Her knowledge of plants and their properties was extensive, which makes her observations about the changes in vegetation near the Blackwood property particularly noteworthy. In a letter to her sister in Massachusetts, dated July 1875, but only discovered among family papers in 1970, she wrote, "The botanical anomalies near the Blackwood greenhouse defy explanation. Plants that should thrive are withering, while species that have no business growing in our climate appear overnight. Something in the soil or air has changed. Henry dismisses my concerns, but I have begun collecting samples. The patterns of decay suggest contamination of a sort I've never encountered." This letter also contains the first mention of what would later be described in police reports as unusual fauna around the estate. The birds avoid the area entirely now. Instead, we see insects of extraordinary size, particularly moths drawn to the greenhouse lights. Their coloration is wrong for any species native to Georgia. I caught one to examine and found its internal structure disturbingly altered, as if modified by some external force. I preserved the specimen, but find myself reluctant to keep it in the house. This specimen was never recovered, though Martha's scientific illustrations of it exist among her papers. Entomologists who examined these drawings in 1972 concluded that the insect depicted combined features of several different species in a way that would be impossible through natural evolution or conventional breeding. By early 1876, Eliza Blackwood had become something of a local legend. Rarely seen in public, when she did venture into Savannah, witnesses described her as heavily veiled and accompanied by a tall man in black whom she referred to only as Mr. Pierce. No record of this individual appears in any city directory or census document. What little we know about Pierce comes from scattered observations in journals and letters. A customs officer named James Harrington described him in a letter to his supervisor. The man towers above 6 feet, yet moves with unusual grace. His accent suggests European education, perhaps Germanic, though he speaks perfect English. Most distinctive is his left hand. He wears a glove always, yet one can observe the irregular shape beneath, as if the fingers were fused or malformed. When I commented on the cargo he was collecting, scientific equipment from Leipzig, he regarded me with eyes that seemed oddly reflective, like those of a nocturnal animal. The Savannah Bank's records, partially damaged in a fire in 1897, but restored and preserved in the city archives, show that Mrs. Blackwood made substantial withdrawals during this period. Between June 1875 and March 1876, she removed funds equivalent to nearly $50,000 in today's currency. All was in gold rather than paper notes. The bank manager, Theodore Phillips, noted his concerns in a letter to the bank's board of directors dated February 12, 1876. The widow continues her unusual financial activities. When questioned about the purpose of such large withdrawals, she simply states, "Household improvements. I have taken the liberty of noting these transactions separately, should questions arise later." Phillips also recorded an unusual conversation with Mrs. Blackwood in his personal diary. "Mrs. B. came again for gold today. When I suggested treasury notes might be more convenient, she replied, 'Mr. Phillips, what I pursue requires materials untainted by the transient faith of governments.' She then asked if I knew of reliable men who might perform discreet excavation work, preferably those without family connections in Savannah. I recommended none, but made note to alert the authorities should strangers begin digging operations at the estate. The true nature of these improvements would remain unknown until many years later." The first indication that something truly aberrant was occurring at Magnolia Estate came from an unlikely source: shipping records. The Savannah Port Authority's manifest books, preserved now in the city's Maritime Museum, list numerous deliveries to the Blackwood property throughout late 1875. Most notable were 6 separate shipments from a scientific supply company in Philadelphia, specializing in medical and chemical equipment. These shipments, marked fragile and handled with care, were always retrieved personally by Mr. Pierce, who paid substantial fees for discretion. One dock worker, William Seaton, left an account of these deliveries in a statement to police following the 1877 investigation. "The crates came regular-like, always on the third Thursday. Glass equipment mostly, from what I could tell when one broke open. Jars and tubes like in a hospital, but bigger than any I'd seen. There were metal parts, too, with copper wire coiled around them. The man Pierce would inspect everything before loading it on his wagon, wearing strange rubber gloves up to his elbows. Once I asked him what it was all for, just being friendly-like. He stared at me so hard I couldn't move, then said, 'To make time irrelevant, Mr. Seaton.' Knew my name, though I'd never told him. Never asked questions after that." Further, records from the Southern Telegraph Company indicate an unusual number of telegrams exchanged between Eliza Blackwood and recipients in Boston, London, and, mysteriously, Port-au-Prince in Haiti. The content of these telegrams was never recorded, but the frequency and international nature of the communications raised eyebrows among the telegraph operators, one of whom, Samuel Thornton, mentioned them in a letter to his brother. "The widow keeps us busy with her foreign messages, always in code, too. The boss says not to discuss it, but something seems off about the whole business." A partial decryption of one such coded message was found among the papers of Professor Allen Richards of Harvard University after his death in 1919. Richards, a mathematician and early cryptographer, had apparently received some of these telegrams from a colleague at the telegraph office. His notes suggest the messages contained requests for information about obscure medical procedures, including electrical stimulation of inactive tissue and chemical preservation methods. The most concerning decoded fragment reads, "Success with subject C. Voluntary movement achieved for 17 minutes post-procedure. Require additional galvanic equipment and Haitian compound as previously discussed." By spring of 1876, rumors about Eliza Blackwood and the estate had reached such a pitch that the mayor of Savannah, George Anderson, dispatched 2 police officers to conduct a welfare check. The official report, filed on April 8, 1876, states only that the officers were admitted to the entry hall by Mr. Pierce, assured that Mrs. They reported nothing unusual, though the senior officer, Sergeant James Miller, later told his wife, who recorded it in her personal journal, that the house had an unnatural chill and smelled of chemicals and something like overripe fruit. What Miller didn't include in his official report, but later confided to a fellow officer, was the strange sound he heard emanating from behind a locked door off the main hallway. A mechanical clicking, regular as a heartbeat, but overlaid with something that sounded like labored breathing. Blackwood was in good health but deeply mourning, and then politely but firmly shone out. When I inquired about it, this Pierce fellow said it was simply a new type of clock the mistress had imported from Switzerland, but no clockwork I've ever heard sounds quite like that. The estate's greenhouse became the subject of particular interest. Once visible from the river road, by mid-1876 it had been surrounded by a high brick wall. Workers from Savannah who built this wall later spoke of being forbidden to look inside the greenhouse and of hearing strange mechanical sounds from within. One bricklayer, Thomas Connor, broke his silence in 1890, long after leaving Savannah for New Orleans. In an interview with a writer collecting folklore of the South, he said, "We were paid triple the going rate, but had to work by strict rules. Never look through the glass, never come before 9 in the morning, always leave before sunset." The man Pierce would watch us, never speaking. One day a section of canvas covering the glass blew down in the wind. I saw inside for just a moment. Strange equipment, like nothing I'd seen before. Tables with odd contraptions. Pierce saw me looking. By nightfall I was on a boat bound for Louisiana, with a purse of gold and a warning never to return to Georgia. Connor's account was dismissed as exaggeration at the time, but it aligns with physical evidence later discovered at the site. Robert Campbell, the journalist who had earlier attempted to interview Mrs. Blackwood, didn't abandon his curiosity. His journal entries throughout 1876 show an increasing obsession with the widow and her estate. In July 1876, he writes of bribing one of the few remaining servants, a man named Isaiah, to smuggle him onto the grounds after dark. What Campbell witnessed that night is described in fragmented, hurried writing that contrasts sharply with his usually meticulous hand. Greenhouse lit from within, glass clouded with strange condensation. Approached for south side, where vegetation provides cover. Strange sounds, mechanical, but also wet. Through one clear pane saw tables, equipment like hospital but wrongly arranged. Large glass containers, tubing. Something moving inside largest vessel, could not clearly see. E appeared wearing rubber apron, heavily stained. Another figure assisting, not Pierce, but shorter. E making notes, very methodical. Subject on table partially obscured. Isaiah pulling me away, terrified. Says she knows when someone watches. Left immediately. Campbell's next entry, dated 3 days later, indicates he developed a severe fever immediately following this excursion. He recovered physically, but appears to have abandoned his investigation. His final reference to the matter states only, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. I will not speak of this matter further." He left Savannah 6 months later for a position with a newspaper in Charleston and never returned. What Campbell didn't record in his journal but later related to a colleague in Charleston who documented the conversation in 1882 was his belief that he had been deliberately exposed to something. "I was perfectly healthy before that night. Within hours, I burned with fever and saw terrible visions. Not hallucinations, mind you, but memories of what I'd witnessed, only clearer. I saw the widow standing over what appeared to be her research, but altered somehow, as if reality itself bent around her. She was speaking, not in English, but something older, and the air around her seemed to distort. When the fever broke, I found a symbol drawn on my forearm in what looked like ash, a spiral with 3 branches. It faded after a few days, but I knew I'd been marked. The message was clear: forget or face the consequences." The winter of 1876-77 was unusually cold for coastal Georgia. The Savannah River froze along its edges, something not seen since the 1840s. During this period, neighbors reported that smoke rose constantly from all chimneys of the Magnolia estate, even those in unused wings of the house. The greenhouse remained illuminated throughout the night, the glow visible above the wall despite the frost that should have obscured the glass. Martha Turner, whose property offered the closest vantage point to the estate, wrote on January 15, 1877, 3 wagons arrived after midnight, covered cargo, drivers who spoke no English. Henry says they appeared to be foreign, perhaps German or Eastern European. They departed before dawn, wagons noticeably lighter. I find myself unable to sleep facing the window that overlooks that place. In a separate entry a week later, she added, "The river water near the Blackwood property has changed. It carries an oily sheen and smells of metal. Fish are found dead along the banks each morning, their bodies strangely preserved rather than decomposing. Thomas found one that had been dead for days, yet remained intact. When cut open, its blood was thick and unusually dark. Henry forbids me to collect samples, but I cannot help my scientific curiosity. Whatever chemicals are being dumped from the estate, their properties defy conventional understanding." The most compelling account from this period comes from Dr. William Bradford, a physician newly arrived to Savannah from Philadelphia. In February 1877, he was summoned urgently to Magnolia Estate, the first medical professional allowed on the property since Dr. Merritt's disappearance. Bradford kept detailed notes of all his cases, and his leather-bound journal for 1877, now held in the medical archives at Emory University, contains his observations. February 20, called to Blackwood Estate, debris, injury to assistant, most unusual household. Admitted by tall gentleman Pierce, who seems to function as butler and guard. Patient was young man, perhaps 30, foreign accent, German, named only as Klaus, suffering from chemical burns to hands and face. Burns consistent with strong acid, treated as best I could. Requested patient be transferred to hospital in Savannah. Request denied by Mrs. Blackwood, who identified herself as widow of caller Blackwood. Woman most strange, intense eyes, manner both aristocratic and unsettling. Speaks with unusual cadence, offered substantial payment for my discretion, showed me room prepared for patient's recovery, well equipped, suggesting previous medical use. Glimpsed laboratory beyond, unusual equipment, some I did not recognize despite my training. Mrs. B. questioned me extensively about my medical knowledge, particularly regarding recent European research into preservation techniques. Conversation veered into areas I found inappropriate, Bavarian experiments, disputed research by Dr. H. in Vienna. I made excuses and departed, though she pressed for me to return. Upon reflection, I believe chemical burns not consistent with accident, but rather prolonged exposure. Patient's affect suggested sedation. Environment felt controlled, oppressive. Will consult with authorities if approached again. In a later entry, Bradford described a second visit to treat the same assistant. February 27. Returned to Blackwood Estate. Klaus's burns healing poorly. Observed unusual characteristics in tissue. Edges of wounds appear almost crystallized, not as expected. Patient now exhibiting neurological symptoms. Tremors, aphasia, pupils dilated and minimally responsive. Administered morphine for pain. Mrs. B. observed treatment with clinical detachment, taking notes. When I expressed concern about patient's deterioration, she remarked, "His sacrifice advances our understanding." I questioned this wording, to which she replied that all medical progress requires risk. During treatment, heard rhythmic mechanical sounds from adjacent room, like a steam engine, but quieter, more regular. As I was preparing to leave, Mrs. B. asked if I had experience with electrical applications in medicine. I acknowledged familiarity with basic applications. She then showed me a device of her own design, a modified galvanic battery connected to needles of unusual composition. She claimed it could restore vital essence to dormant tissue. The implications of her research disturbed me greatly. I made excuse of another appointment and fled the estate. Cannot reconcile what I witnessed with medical science as I understand it. Fear for Klaus's ultimate fate. Dr. Bradford was indeed called back to the estate twice more in the following month. His notes grow increasingly disturbed, mentioning procedures I cannot condone and research that violates natural law. His final entry regarding Magnolia Estate, dated March 28, 1877, reads simply, "God forgive me for what I have witnessed. I can no longer remain silent." The following day, Bradford approached Judge William Garrison with his concerns. No official record exists of this meeting, but Judge Garrison's personal calendar notes an appointment with Bradford, followed by one with Police Chief Edward Montgomery. Whatever was discussed, it prompted action. On April 2, 1877, a warrant was issued for the search of Magnolia Estate on grounds of suspected unlawful activities. A letter from Judge Garrison to the governor, discovered in state archives in 1965 but quickly resealed, reportedly contained the following passage: "The physician's testimony suggests activities of such disturbing nature that I hesitate to commit them fully to paper. If even half of what he reports is accurate, Eliza Blackwood has transgressed not merely the laws of Georgia, but the very laws of nature. The use of electrical and chemical agents in ways that defy conventional understanding all point to experimental practices that cannot be countenanced in a civilized society." The events that followed changed Savannah forever, yet somehow faded from public memory. According to police reports, when officers arrived at Magnolia Estate on the morning of April 3rd, they found the gates unlocked and the front door standing open. The house appeared to have been abandoned in haste, meals left half-eaten, personal belongings scattered. Most disturbing was the greenhouse, where they discovered what Chief Montgomery would later describe only as evidence of experiments contrary to nature and human dignity. The official police report, sealed by court order until 1952, details the discovery of specialized medical equipment, surgical instruments, and extensive written records documenting what appeared to be attempts to extend life beyond natural boundaries. The papers, primarily in Eliza Blackwood's precise handwriting, reference techniques drawn from medical science, folk practices from Haiti, and ancient Egyptian preservation methods. What the official report only hinted at, but was described more discreetly in Chief Montgomery's private correspondence with the governor, was the discovery of unusual apparatus suggesting advanced scientific experimentation far beyond conventional understanding. The letter mentioned devices that combined mechanical and organic elements in ways that defied explanation with current scientific knowledge. Most disturbing were the cellars beneath the main house, expanded far beyond their original dimensions. Police found a series of rooms that one officer described as more extensive than seems architecturally possible. These chambers contained evidence suggesting that unusual research had been conducted there. The report notes specialized equipment of unusual design and modifications to standard medical apparatus that suggest unconventional applications. Officer Michael Donovan, one of the first to enter the cellars, later requested transfer to another precinct and eventually left the police force entirely. Before his departure, he confided in a colleague, "What we found in the lowest chamber can't be described in ordinary terms. There was evidence of experiments that went beyond what science should attempt. When I close my eyes at night, I still see that laboratory, still hear that strange mechanical hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves." No complete explanation for what was found was ever provided, though a section of the cellar floor showed evidence of having been recently excavated and refilled. Authorities began excavation, but halted when a message arrived from the governor's office in Atlanta ordering them to seal the estate and withdraw pending further instruction. This order, preserved in the state archives, cited matters of public health and public order. It was followed 3 days later by a more comprehensive directive classifying all findings at Magnolia Estate as sensitive information relevant to state security and ordering all materials removed to government custody. What happened to these materials has never been satisfactorily explained. According to a clerk at the Savannah courthouse who spoke anonymously to a historian in 1963, men identifying themselves as federal agents arrived within a week and removed all documents, photographs, and physical evidence collected from the estate. The clerk recalled that these men wore no uniforms and presented credentials I had never seen before. Of particular interest is what happened to Dr. Bradford following the raid. His medical practice in Savannah closed abruptly in May 1877. Hospital records indicate he accepted a position with the United States government, though the department is not specified. His journal entries cease entirely for nearly 2 years, resuming in 1879, when he apparently established a new practice in Washington, D.C. These later entries make no reference to the Blackwood case, though colleagues noted a profound change in his personality and interests. Once gregarious and innovative, he became withdrawn and conservative in his medical approach, refusing to involve himself with any research involving electricity or experimental treatments. In 1885, Bradford published a paper in a medical journal titled Ethical Boundaries in Modern Medicine, which, while never directly referencing his experiences in Savannah, contained passionate arguments against the pursuit of knowledge without moral constraint and warnings about arrogance in the face of natural law. The paper specifically cautioned against emerging fields of research involving electrical stimulation and chemical preservation techniques. As for Eliza Blackwood and her associates, they had vanished completely. A nationwide alert yielded no results. The only possible lead came 6 weeks later, when a ship's captain in Charleston reported having transported a veiled woman matching Mrs. Blackwood's description, accompanied by 2 men and numerous trunks and crates, to Havana, Cuba. By the time authorities investigated, the trail had gone cold. However, customs records in Havana do show the arrival of a Mrs. Elizabeth Black with scientific equipment and medical necessities in late April 1877. The customs official noted that one of her traveling companions, a tall gentleman with an unusual hand, paid triple the normal import duties to expedite their entry and ensure no inspection of their cargo. Magnolia estate itself became the subject of legal wrangling as distant Blackwood relatives emerged to claim ownership. Eventually, the property was sold at auction to cover outstanding tax obligations. The main house was destroyed by fire in 1879, a fire that, according to the fire marshal's report, originated simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the structure. The greenhouse was dismantled, its materials sold for scrap. Today the land has been subdivided and developed, with no physical trace of the estate remaining. A curious footnote to this phase of the story appears in the memoirs of Harold Jenkins, the attorney who handled the estate sale. Published posthumously in 1922, they include this passage: "No one who entered the greenhouse after the authorities completed their work remained in good health. 3 potential buyers developed the same symptoms: unusual sensory disturbances, accelerated heartbeat, and eventually temporary paralysis. The glass itself seemed to have absorbed something unwholesome. When the structure was finally dismantled, the workers wore cloth masks soaked in vinegar and refused to handle the materials with bare hands. Even the soil beneath was excavated and removed to an undisclosed location. I advised the new owners to leave that section of the property undeveloped, advice they have wisely heeded to this day." The full truth about Eliza Blackwood and what occurred at Magnolia Estate might have been lost entirely if not for a discovery made in 1963 during the renovation of an old storage facility in Atlanta. Workers uncovered a sealed metal box containing what appeared to be personal effects removed from the estate, a journal belonging to Eliza Blackwood, correspondence between her and scientists across Europe, and detailed diagrams of what she called her preservation apparatus. These materials painted a disturbing picture. It seems that following her husband's death, which the journal suggests was not from natural causes, Eliza Blackwood became obsessed with the concept of extending human life beyond death. Her writings reference the work of European scientists experimenting with electricity and chemical preservation, as well as older traditions from various cultures. One entry from September 1875 reads, "James was always the visionary in life, but in death he becomes my greatest work." The colonel believed in progress through any means necessary. How fitting that he now serves as the vessel for the ultimate progress, victory over mortality itself. The initial failure was merely instructive. Each attempt brings greater success. The latest formulation, incorporating the Haitian elements with the electrical framework suggested by Müller, maintained function for nearly 6 hours after the procedure. Activity, as measured by the modified galvanometer, continued in a reduced but stable pattern. James would be proud of what we achieve in his name. Most telling is a letter dated January 1877 from a Dr. Heinrich Müller in Vienna, responding to queries from Mrs. Blackwood. He writes, "Your advances in maintaining tissue viability exceed anything we have achieved here. Your suggestion regarding the introduction of modified electrical currents to stimulate autonomic functions shows great promise. However, I must caution against your proposed next phase. Even if successful, what returns may not be what was lost." A subsequent letter from Müller, dated March 1877, takes on a more alarmed tone. "I must express my gravest concerns regarding your last communication. Your approach crosses boundaries no researcher in Europe has dared approach. Your description suggests you have achieved what many would consider beyond the realm of natural science. The ethical implications alone would condemn such work, but I fear the practical consequences even more. You speak of evolving consciousness and transcendence of normal human limitations. These phrases suggest not preservation, but transformation. I implore you to terminate this line of research immediately." The journal entries grow increasingly erratic over time, shifting from the methodical notes of a scientist to the fervent writings of someone consumed by her mission. The final entry, dated April 1, 1877, 2 days before the police raid, reads, "Success at last. Subject responds to stimuli. Eyes track movement. Function maintained without external support. Activity detected by electrical measurement. He is returning. Not completely, not as he was, but returning nonetheless. Pierce advises immediate relocation as Bradford has betrayed us. All essential equipment being prepared for transport. The work must continue." The identity of he is never explicitly stated, though context strongly suggests she referred to her husband, Colonel Blackwood. These materials were quickly removed by government representatives, and the historian, who had been allowed brief access to them, was required to sign extensive confidentiality agreements. However, he managed to make several surreptitious notes that formed the basis of an anonymous article published in an obscure academic journal in 1968. The article, titled only "Southern Gothic Science at the Boundaries," was largely dismissed as sensationalism or fiction. In 1965, an elderly man named Isaiah Johnson came forward claiming to be the same Isaiah who had once worked at Magnolia Estate. In an interview with a local historian, Johnson, then in his late 90s, described witnessing Mrs. Blackwood and her associates transporting a large trunk to the greenhouse late at night in March 1877. He claimed the trunk moved on its own and that sounds came from inside, unlike anything natural. Johnson also described the gradual transformation of Pierce over the months he worked at the estate. "When I first came on, Mr. Pierce was like any other man, except for his height and that strange hand of his. But as the months passed, he changed. His movements became stiffer, mechanical-like. Sometimes he wouldn't blink for minutes on end. The mistress would take him into the greenhouse for hours, and when he came out, he'd have new peculiarities about him. Once I helped him when he collapsed in the hallway. I noticed strange markings on his wrists, like precision scars in geometric patterns. He saw me looking and said, 'She improves us all, in time.' I gave notice the next day, but she wouldn't let me leave until I trained a replacement." When asked why he had remained silent for so long, Johnson replied, "She told me she'd find me if I spoke. Said distance wouldn't stop her, and I believed her. Still do. But I'm an old man now, and she can't take much more from me than time already has." Johnson died 3 weeks after the interview. The coroner ruled it natural causes, though the historian later noted that Johnson's face bore an expression not consistent with peaceful passing. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the report filed in 1952 by Dr. Eleanor Reed, the pathologist who examined materials from the unsealed police records. Her analysis of soil samples taken from the cellar floor of Magnolia Estate revealed unusual chemical compounds consistent with experimental preservation techniques, as well as traces of electrical equipment far more sophisticated than should have been available in the 1870s. Most disturbing was her conclusion regarding stains found on a fragment of laboratory apron. The material contains substances preserved by unknown method. Samples show abnormalities in structure suggesting unusual alteration. Samples include 3 distinct profiles, all showing signs of the same modification. Nature and purpose of modification cannot be determined with current technology. Dr. Reed's more detailed laboratory notes, found among her personal effects after her death in 1985, contained observations she apparently felt unwise to include in her official report. Material shows evidence of an unknown preservative agent that has prevented normal decomposition. More concerning are the unusual structures visible at microscopic level, what appear to be minute filaments integrated with organic material. These structures are arranged in patterns too regular to be natural formation and too complex to be contamination. The technology required to create such integration would be advanced even by current standards. If these samples truly date from 1877, their implications are profoundly disturbing. Dr. Reed requested permission to conduct further tests, but her request was denied. The following year, she accepted a research position in Switzerland and never again published on forensic pathology. The Magnolia Estate case file was officially closed in 1956, all materials placed under seal for reasons of public interest. A small notation in the corner of the cover sheet, visible in a photograph taken before the sealing, reads simply, "Resolution, inconclusive. Surveillance maintained as per Protocol 17. What Protocol 17 entailed has never been publicly disclosed, but government expense records from the Department of War, later Defense, show regular allocations from 1877 to 1965 for monitoring of subjects related to Georgia Incident S7. These allocations supported travel to various locations, including Cuba, Argentina, East Prussia until 1945, and, curiously, a remote location in the mountains of Tibet. The land where Magnolia Estate once stood has been developed into an upscale residential neighborhood. Residents occasionally report unusual electrical disturbances, particularly during storms. Local utility companies have never found a cause, despite multiple investigations. In 1998, during excavation for a swimming pool at one of these homes, workers uncovered what appeared to be fragments of thick glass and copper wiring of unusual design. Construction was briefly halted while archaeologists examined the site, but their findings were never made public, and work resumed after 2 days. One worker, speaking anonymously to a local newspaper, described finding a sealed glass container about the size of a bread box, containing what looked like strange materials preserved in amber-colored fluid. Before he could photograph it, men identifying themselves as from the EPA arrived and confiscated the container, declaring it potential hazardous waste. The current owners report no unusual occurrences, though many have noted that certain areas of their properties, particularly where the greenhouse once stood, remain consistently cooler than surrounding areas, regardless of season. Several families have attempted to plant gardens in this location, only to find that certain plants grow to unusual size while others wither immediately. Soil samples analyzed by the University of Georgia in 2005 showed elevated levels of silver, copper, and several unidentified organic compounds. As for Eliza Blackwood herself, no confirmed trace of her was ever found after April 1877. However, between 1880 and 1920, medical researchers in Cuba, Mexico, and later Argentina reported encounters with an American woman of similar description, always seeking information on the newest advances in biological preservation and electrochemical stimulation of tissue. These reports became less frequent over time, eventually ceasing altogether. In 1895, a German physician named Werner Schmidt published an account of meeting an American lady of distinguished bearing at a medical conference in Berlin. She demonstrated what she called a perpetual tissue culture, living cells that continued to divide and function outside the body indefinitely when supplied with a specialized nutrient solution. When Schmidt expressed interest in her methods, she invited him to her laboratory in Argentina, but specified he must come alone and tell no one of their arrangement. Schmidt never arrived at his next scheduled appointment, and his whereabouts remained unknown until 1912, when a Brazilian expedition in the Amazon discovered the remains of a camp containing his personal effects and journal. The final entry described preparing to meet the American woman who has conquered mortality. The last potentially connected incident occurred in 1967, when a fire at a private research facility outside Buenos Aires revealed an underground laboratory containing equipment described as decades ahead of current technology. Argentinian authorities reported finding journals dating back to the 1870s, with the most recent entry made just weeks before the fire. An American intelligence agent who served in Argentina during this period wrote in his memoir, heavily redacted before publication in 1995, about an operation codenamed Savannah Containment. The unredacted portions described the discovery of research continuing from 19th century origins and specimens of unclear status, neither fully conventional nor easily classified. The agent noted that all materials were transported to a secure facility in Maryland for ongoing study, and that the site was thoroughly sanitized using Protocol 17 procedures. Today, the Blackwood name has been largely forgotten in Savannah. These materials were confiscated by individuals identifying themselves as American diplomatic personnel, and no further information was ever released. No monuments or markers indicate what once occurred on the property. The few remaining documents related to the case are scattered across various archives, their connections to each other obscured by time and perhaps deliberate intervention. Yet on certain nights, particularly when the air hangs heavy with humidity and the wind blows in from the sea, residents near the former estate report a distinctive odor, partly chemical, partly organic, described by many as sickly sweet. Power outages occur with unusual frequency in the area, often affecting only a few homes at a time. And occasionally, though none will admit it officially, police dispatchers receive calls from the vicinity reporting sounds like machinery operating beneath the ground or lights seen moving through yards where no one should be walking. These reports are logged and filed away, never investigated beyond a cursory drive-through by patrol officers. In 2010, during renovations to one of the oldest homes in the neighborhood, workers discovered a sealed copper tube inside a wall cavity. Inside was a letter dated March 30th, 1877, apparently written by Dr. Bradford the day after his final visit to Magnolia Estate. Addressed simply to those who come after, it reads in part, "What I have witnessed cannot be explained by our current understanding of natural law." Mrs. Blackwood has discovered something that should have remained hidden, a space between life and death where something persists but is altered. She speaks of it as a triumph, but having seen the results, I can only describe it as deeply unsettling. The subjects of her research exist in an unnatural state, sustained by her machines and chemicals. Most disturbing is the apparent evolution. The longer they remain in this state, the less recognizable they become. She calls it transcendence. I call it a terrible mistake. The letter continues. I fear that what she has set in motion cannot be easily stopped. Even if her current work is discovered and destroyed, the knowledge she has gained will persist. She has journals, duplicates of her research, hidden in multiple locations. And worse, she has used these techniques upon herself in more limited fashion. She described the process as insurance against intervention. I believe she has altered her own biology such that conventional limitations may no longer apply to her. Those who seek to bring her to justice should be warned. What they pursue may no longer be entirely as we understand humanity. This letter was examined briefly by local historians before being confiscated by federal authorities, who cited concerns about potentially dangerous formulations contained within the text. The workers who discovered it were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Whatever secrets Eliza Blackwood uncovered in her greenhouse laboratory, whatever boundary between life and death she may have crossed, the full truth remains elusive. Perhaps it is better that way. As Dr. Heinrich Müller cautioned in his letter to Mrs. Blackwood, some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again, and what waits on the other side may be something for which nature has no name. The Magnolia estate and its mistress remain a whispered legend in certain circles in Savannah, a reminder that in the years following the Civil War, when the old order collapsed and new ideas flourished, some experiments ventured into territories where science and nightmare converge. And somewhere, perhaps, in a darkened room filled with humming equipment and the scent of chemicals, the work that began in that greenhouse in 1875 continues, the ultimate quest to defeat mortality itself, regardless of the cost to those who pursue it, or to what remains of their humanity. For those who seek additional information, the journey will likely prove frustrating. Records disappear, witnesses fall silent, and government agencies deny any knowledge of Eliza Blackwood or her research. Some stories are not meant to be fully told. Some truths are not meant to be fully known, and some boundaries, despite human curiosity and ambition, are perhaps best left uncrossed. As you sit there listening to this account in the dark, consider this. The techniques Eliza Blackwood pioneered were documented. The knowledge she gained was preserved. And somewhere, that research may still exist, waiting for another mind brilliant and obsessed enough to continue where she left off. The question is not whether such knowledge could be rediscovered. The question is whether it should be. In 2018, a curator at the Smithsonian Institution, while cataloging artifacts in a previously sealed storage area, discovered a small brass device of unusual construction. Resembling a pocket watch but with additional dials and what appeared to be small reservoirs for fluid, the object bore a single word engraved on its inner casing, Blackwood. When connected to a power source during examination, the device emitted a faint rhythmic clicking like a heartbeat. Shortly after this discovery, the entire collection was reclassified as classified material and removed to an undisclosed location. Perhaps some echoes of the past never truly fade. Perhaps some knowledge once gained can never be completely lost. And perhaps Eliza Blackwood's quest for immortality succeeded in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. The night grows late, and this account must end. But somewhere in Savannah, in a neighborhood built over the ruins of Magnolia Estate, the ground grows cold. The air carries a sweet chemical scent, and beneath the earth something mechanical continues to tick, awaiting the return of its creator.